Have you ever wondered what became of England's most feared king once death claimed him? Behind the legend of Henry VIII lies a coffin that did not rest in silence but burst with decay, spilling secrets no crown could contain. Today, we unsealed the truth of a monarch whose power in life was unstoppable, but in death became a story of rot, ruin, and forgotten horror. Don't forget to like and drop a comment. That really helps more hidden stories from around the world reach you. And subscribe. 99% of viewers watch and don't subscribe, but signing up ensures you catch our next gripping tale. What kind of king leaves behind a trail of wives executed, a church torn from Rome, and a nation forever changed? Henry VIII was more than a ruler. He was a force that shaped the destiny of England with iron fists and ruthless decisions. His appetite for power, wealth, and control made him one of the most infamous monarchs in history. But behind the grandeur of his court and the glitter of his crown, his story would end in a way no one could ignore. Henry's reign was marked by scandal and blood. He dissolved monasteries, seized lands, and executed anyone who dared to defy him. His 6 marriages became symbols of both political ambition and personal obsession, with 2 of his queens meeting the executioner's blade. Even allies feared him, knowing that loyalty meant little in a court where betrayal and death lurked in every shadow. Henry wasn't only building an empire, he was rewriting the very fabric of England's religion and society. Yet power has its price, and Henry's life of excess took a toll on his body and his legacy. The same king who towered over Europe with fear and authority was slowly consumed by disease and decay. His downfall wasn't at the hands of enemies, but by time itself, waiting patiently to strip away the illusion of invincibility. And what followed after his final breath would prove far more shocking than his most ruthless acts in life. What happens when the most powerful man in England faces a death he cannot control? In January 1547, Henry VIII, once celebrated for his strength and dominance, lay weak, obese, and plagued by festering wounds. The king who once cut a striking figure in armor now struggled to move, his body collapsing under years of excess and disease. His final days were not of glory, but of pain, silence, and fear of what awaited him beyond life. Doctors and servants who witnessed his decline described a man nearly unrecognizable. His leg ulcers oozed constantly, filling his chambers with a stench that no incense could mask. His weight had grown so extreme that mechanical devices were needed to move him. Rumors spread that even in life, his body was beginning to rot from within, a horrifying image for a monarch once feared across Europe. Death was not an escape, it was the final humiliation of a king consumed by his own excesses. But Henry's suffering did not end with his last breath. When his lifeless body was prepared for burial, the reality of his condition posed a serious challenge. Preserving the remains of such a massive and diseased king was nearly impossible, and the consequences of failure would soon become legend. What followed inside his coffin turned his death into one of the most disturbing royal tales in English history. What if I told you that even in death, Henry VIII's body refused to stay contained? Shortly after his burial in St. George's Chapel at Windsor Castle, disturbing accounts began to spread. Chroniclers recorded that his coffin began to leak, the fluids of his decaying body seeping into the stone floor. Some claimed that dogs were seen licking at the liquid, a grotesque image that became one of the most infamous legends surrounding his death. The truth behind these reports lies in the state of his body at the moment of death. Henry was enormously overweight, and the buildup of gases inside his corpse created unbearable pressure within the coffin. The lead casing meant to seal him in could not withstand it. Over time, the coffin warped, cracked, and collapsed, leaving behind a scene unworthy of a king. What was meant to be a solemn royal resting place had become a grim reminder of nature's triumph over authority. Yet this was only the beginning of the strange journey of Henry's remains. His coffin would not rest untouched for centuries. Wars, executions, and political turmoil meant his vault was disturbed more than once, and new bodies were forced inside to share the same cramped space. What investigators later found when they opened his tomb would reveal just how far time and decay had stripped the once mighty king of his power. Did you know that King Henry VIII doesn't rest alone in his vault? Beneath the stone floor of St. George's Chapel, he shares his final chamber with others who met very different fates. His beloved third wife, Jane Seymour, was placed beside him soon after his death. But more shockingly, the executed King Charles I was crammed into the same vault a century later. A space meant for a king and queen became a crowded tomb of royal ghosts. When the vault was opened in the 19th century, witnesses described a scene far from majestic. Henry's coffin was crushed and defaced. Jane's lay broken, and Charles I's severed head was reportedly still separate from his body. The grandeur of monarchy was nowhere to be seen, replaced instead by decay, chaos, and the remnants of hurried burials. The once mighty Henry VIII, who demanded respect in life, now lay in a desecrated coffin among the ruins of other rulers. But the most chilling detail wasn't who he rested with, but what had happened to his coffin itself. Time, pressure, and neglect had disfigured it so badly that parts of the king's remains were exposed. For a monarch who controlled every detail of his court, death stripped away every illusion of order. And what historians uncovered next inside that dark chamber would reveal the final, shocking truth about Henry VIII's fate. If Henry VIII's story has you hooked, don't miss what comes next. Subscribe now to uncover more dark truths of history. Hit like to help share this tale, and drop a comment telling us what shocked you most about his fate. What if I told you the coffin of Henry VIII was never left untouched? For centuries, the vault beneath St. George's Chapel became a place of constant disturbance. Wars, executions, and shifting politics turned it into a crowded chamber of restless royalty. Every time the tomb was opened, the once mighty king's remains grew weaker, his coffin more broken, his dignity further erased. Records show that by the 17th century, the vault was already altered when Charles I's mutilated body was hastily buried there after his execution. Later inspections revealed the shocking state of Henry's resting place. His coffin split, wood crumbling, and lead torn away. Instead of a secure royal chamber, it looked more like a collapsed ruin, a grim reflection of how time disrespects power. The vault had transformed into a shared grave of chaos, not majesty. Yet the most unsettling moment came centuries later when curious Victorians finally pried open the dark chamber. What they found inside was no longer the king who once ruled with fear, but the wreckage of a body defeated by decay. His final appearance was a haunting spectacle, proof that even England's most feared monarch could not escape the slow, merciless grip of rot. And what they documented next exposed the chilling details of his last, humiliating fate. What do you think investigators saw when they finally looked inside Henry VIII's coffin? In 1813, Dean Arthur Stanley and his team examined the vault, and the sight was far from royal dignity. Henry's massive coffin was shattered, the lid collapsed inward, and the lead lining split apart. The remains of one of history's most feared kings lay broken, crushed, and stripped of the grandeur he once commanded. Witnesses reported fragments of bone, traces of fabric, and corroded metal scattered in the vault. Even the initials once engraved on his coffin were fading, barely recognizable through centuries of rot and collapse. Jane Seymour's coffin beside him was also damaged, while Charles I's severed head had to be rejoined with his body. The chamber looked less like a royal resting place and more like a vault of ruin, where the passage of time mocked the idea of eternal honor. Yet this scene was more than decay, it was symbolism. The king who once terrified Europe and reshaped a nation was now a skeleton in a crumbling box, powerless against time. His story had shifted from dominance to fragility, from legend to wreckage. But the real question remained, what does Henry VIII's final fate reveal about the price of power? And how does it echo across history even today? How does a king who once controlled life and death end up powerless in his own grave? Henry VIII's story is the ultimate reminder that power, no matter how absolute, is temporary. His empire, his fearsome reputation, and even his carefully planned legacy all crumbled when faced with the relentless advance of decay. The man who defied the Pope and executed queens could not command his own body to resist rot. For centuries, Henry was remembered as the monarch who bent nations to his will, yet his remains tell a different tale. His bloated body leaked through its coffin, his vault collapsed, and his bones were left exposed to curious eyes. The mighty image of the king dissolved into a disturbing reality: disease, disfigurement, and disintegration. What was once a throne of absolute authority became a coffin of humiliation, sealed in darkness yet never fully at rest. But this is where history takes its most haunting turn, because while Henry's flesh and coffin rotted away, his legend only grew stronger. Portraits, myths, and stories of his reign survived the centuries, even as his body disintegrated, which leads to the final, unsettling question: what truly lasts, the man himself, or the story he left behind? What survives after centuries of silence, the body or the story? Henry VIII's remains may be nothing more than fragments in a ruined coffin, but his legend still commands our imagination. His rise, his cruelty, and his fall remind us that power fades, yet stories endure. And it's these hidden truths of history, the ones buried beneath stone and dust, that reveal the most about who we are and where we come from. Every vault opened, every forgotten tale uncovered, brings us closer to the raw reality behind the myths of royalty. These stories aren't in the history books, they're the secrets time tried to erase. By keeping them alive, we challenge the illusion of eternal glory and expose the human truth that even kings couldn't escape. If you want more forgotten stories like this brought back to life, make sure to subscribe, comment, and like this video. Your support helps these hidden chapters of history reach more people, so together we can keep uncovering the chilling truths the past tried to bury.